And I'm here today because I care deeply about gun violence. I care deeply about racial justice, and I'm angry at the way that these racial injustices of gun violence in America exploit me, my family, and my community. One example of this injustice is forcing me to have a very hard conversation with my son when he was 8 years old about how safe it would be for him to play football at our neighborhood park. Because weeks before football season was to start, 14-year-old Pontel Braxton was shot and killed across the street from the same field where my son would be playing. This is not a conversation that I want to be having with my son. Am I alone? No. This is one of millions of injustices of gun violence. The second injustice, and the one that moved me to action, was the death of Terrell Mays Jr., who was killed inside his home with a plate of spaghetti when he was running away from gunshots to the family planned hiding spot. He was the same age as my daughter at the time. He was 3 years old. At that point, I decided that I wasn't going to wait for a bullet to come through my home before taking action. This is not the world that I want to live in, and this is not the world that I want to raise my family in. So I decided better than who me and the rest of us in this room to start defining the world that we want to live in. So I became a member of Protect Minnesota. And I feel like I'm a different person now. My kids give me hope, and they make me want to work for a better world, so that when I send them out in the world, I know that I've done everything that I can do so that they are safe. But here's what we're up against. And I know Jean went over a couple of these numbers, so I'm going to run through them briefly. 32,000 is the number of people in America that are killed by guns each year, or that's 88 people per day. 44 is the number of school shootings since Sandy Hook. 3,431 is the number of Minnesotans killed by guns between 2001 and 2010, versus 3,490, the total number of combat deaths in the war in Iraq. This is not just a crisis, but also a war on us. In this chronic state of war on our streets, we're confused by the chaos, and we don't understand what's happening. We look for someone to blame, and that's almost always people of color and poor communities. Now let's look at the suicides versus homicides in Minnesota. 347 is the number of deaths by guns in 2010 in Minnesota, and 80% of those were suicides. In fact, between 2008 to 2010, there were 800 suicides involving firearms that were committed in Minnesota by white people, compared to 17 African-American firearm suicides. And in 1995, Minneapolis was renamed Murderapolis for one of the highest homicide rates in the country, with 99 deaths by gun. What's the number for 2012? It's 41, less than half. So I want to be clear here. Homicides are going down, but homicides are still the #1 top cover story in the media when covering the North Side, and yet the reality is suicides make up 80% of overall deaths. This is not what's portrayed in the mainstream media or the dominant conversation about guns. What mainstream media does is cover the way gun violence disproportionately affects communities of color, except they don't say that. And when we do not actually name the racial inequities around gun policy in America, we actually feed into the larger narrative that we should be scared of each other. And we do harm by perpetuating these lies. Here's some more truths. Murder and non-negligent manslaughter victims are most frequently Black or Latino, with Blacks compromising 67% of victims and Latinos compromising 28.1%. Yet in 2010, African Americans were roughly 13% of the U.S. population. There's something very wrong with these numbers.